The car that knew too much. Will this be another disappointment? The car muttered to itself. I sure hope not, it added, because that would mean a second trip to the DMV. Kelly sat behind the wheel, fingers tightening on the steering wheel like a pianist rehearsing the opening chord of a concerto. We idled at the stoplight, the smear of early morning October cold pressing against the windshield. She'd driven me to this hidden entrance before, once, twice, only to freeze at the median, waiting for a gap that never came. Drivers either sped through like their lives were on fast forward, or crawled like distracted snails, scrolling through screens, eyes elsewhere. Today, the truck in the lane beside us had decided to slow its horses, and Kelly, impatient but watchful, nudged me into an acute left, tires skimming over the dark, uneven asphalt, and we slipped into the place of uncertainty. Remember that first day you turned on the wiper instead of the blinker? I said, because some memories are just lodged in a car's wiring. Kelly groaned. Oh yeah. Again. I almost caused a pileup, didn't I? You almost, I replied, which is to say you did more than almost. She'd done that more than a few times. In her home country, she had driven on the left. Here, everything was flipped, the lanes, the instincts, the small rituals that make driving feel like muscle memory. At first, the signals and wipers were foreign buttons on a piano she'd never played, and motorists honked with the kind of abandon that leaves echoes in one's ribs. She learned slow, stubborn lessons until the mistakes thinned and routine took root. But back to her first visit to the DMV to take the knowledge test. It was an early, chilly, but manageable October morning. She told her co-workers she was going to take the test. They cheered her on, saying she had nothing to worry about. It was easy as 1, 2, 3. That praise bolstered her confidence. She'd never taken this driving test before, and the result would determine the next phase. In her home country, 5 years earlier, she had simply bought her license. Failing the test didn't matter then because she'd still receive the card. That was not how things worked here. The exam had 2 sections. You had to get every question in the first section correct to move on to the second. By some miracle, she answered all of Section 1 perfectly and, in her head, shouted, "Yes! I knew I could do this, even though I've never done it before." Her triumph was private and bright for a second, until the second section shifted from names and signs to scenarios and judgment calls. The rote memorization that had been Kelly's safety net began to fray. If a stopped school bus extends its stop sign and you're on the opposite side of a divided roadway, do you stop? Kelly saw the words school bus and stop sign and answered on instinct. Stop. Wrong. Her confidence cracked like a dry twig. The question tested nuance, not reflex. She came out to her co-workers with a face she'd practiced in the mirror. How'd it go? They asked. They expected triumph because she was competent, capable, a steady professional at work. Her colleagues' expectations made her failure sting more than the test ever could. I didn't pass, she said quietly, then added, half-puffed like a shy magician, I missed by 1. They didn't wholly believe her. Everyone kept saying, there's no way, you ace everything. Later, when some of those same confident co-workers tried the test and floundered, many didn't even pass the first section, Kelly felt a complicated mix of schadenfreude and sympathy. She'd hoped they'd do well, but the truth was a small vindication. This exam was not an easy thing. 2 weeks later, the same nervousness returned. She needed to visit family in Connecticut for spring break and wanted her license in hand. This time she studied differently. Videos, practice tests, parking lots after hours. The DMV room hummed like a waiting room for confessions. Inkless doodles crawled across the desk where the computer sat, her fingers tracing helpful diagrams she'd seen in tutorials. Time and test avoidance became her only friends in the cramped silence. At the moment of truth, she nearly didn't breathe. By the time the computer finished, she had scraped through. When the result blinked pass, the air conditioner's hum suddenly felt like a warm hand. She left with a grin so wide it made the front of my hood want to grin back. Road test day arrived a week later. She practiced reversing around cones in the empty lot near her apartment, her least favorite maneuver by far. In another country, she'd once been ferried through a practical exam by a generous instructor who steadied the wheel and saved her dignity. Here, she would have to do it on her own. She'd become the forward driver, avoiding tight spots that required backing in favor of head-in parking and forward exits. But, prepared and a little braver now, she headed to the DMV with me humming quietly under her. The examiner that day chatted as if coffee were involved in every sentence. "Back the car out," she said. Kelly did perfectly, or at least the examiner didn't frown. There was a small moment when the examiner tutted at the cheap steering wheel cover she'd bought from Walmart. "Shh, that thing squeaks," and offered a recommendation for a quieter one. Kelly promised she'd consider it. She was learning the art of playing along. We drove off the DMV lot and into the messy choreography of the city. At the first light, the signal blinked green, and Kelly, ever cautious, paused. The examiner pointed out the light and said, "You can go." Kelly's foot nudged my gas. We rolled forward slowly, careful, obedient. I wanted to show off a little, to accelerate with the smoothness I knew I had, but I held my patience because failing today was not an option. On the return, in the right turn lane, Kelly paused at a red. My instincts told me the turn was free on red if it was safe. Years of local driving had taught me that, but she waited. The mantra slow and steady wins the day, repeating like a prayer between breaths. The examiner finally said, "When it's safe, you can go on red." The acute turn was clear. Kelly steered me through and into the DMV parking lot like a champion sliding into home. She didn't immediately announce whether she passed. "Results go through a supervisor first," she reminded herself, the suspense stretching like an elastic band. 30 minutes later, she was called to the counter. "You passed," the clerk said, and the world tilted like a carnival ride that finally took the hill. Kelly's grin was bright enough to be a headlight. She paid the fee, and the card would arrive in the mail in 7 to 10 business days. She walked out like someone who had just been permitted to be braver. After that, she became oddly expert at preparing others for the test, even friends who seemed better at reversing than she ever was. They showed up at the same parking lots, cones laid out like punctuation marks, and Kelly barked encouragement and tips with the fierce generosity of someone who had been through the fire. The friends who had once scoffed at the DMV's cruelty now sweated under the cones and thanked Kelly for being patient and blunt. I, the car, watched her grow into the role. She taught herself to choose wider parking spaces, to practice three-point turns until they stopped feeling like acrobatics, to check mirrors like rituals. Sometimes she still reached for the wiper when she meant the blinker, and sometimes she swore softly and laughed at herself afterward. Life has seasons. This was one of hers, clumsy, triumphant, full of small recoveries. When she told the story to coworkers later, how she had failed, studied, and finally passed, they cheered in that noisy, office-like way that feels like confetti. Kelly savored their oohs and ahs but kept the truth close. Failure was only a pause on the road, not the end of the journey. As for me, I learned to stifle my impatience and to hum in neutral. I had been driven to the DMV in search of a new kind of ownership, not just of license and right of way, but of a fragile confidence that grows through repetition and small victories. We both came out a little wiser. She learned to back up. I learned to forgive the occasional accidental wipe. And on the mornings we drive past medians and indecisive trucks, we take the turns we need to take, careful, brave, and ready.